The Grand War Council convened in the towering citadel of Zeltareth, a bastion of polished obsidian and shimmering force fields. Beneath its vaulted ceiling, representatives of the Dominion's ruling species debated the grim reality of their war. Holographic displays flickered, depicting the relentless advance of the Draknari horde, whose war engines had laid waste to entire sectors. Planets burned. Fleets crumbled. The Dominion had never faced an enemy so ruthless, so adaptable. The thought was inconceivable to them. They were the ruling power of the known galaxy until now. Grand Admiral Vornik of the Calvash Dominion, his massive reptilian form clad in ceremonial armor, slammed a clawed fist onto the stone table. "We require reinforcements immediately. The Draknari have broken through the Enthalis defensive line. Another system falls, and we lose our foothold in the Veil Nebula." His dark yellow eyes glowed with barely contained fury. "Who among us can answer this threat?" The assembled leaders exchanged uneasy glances. The Dominion's fleets were stretched thin, their reserves nearly depleted. Their might had been built on centuries of overwhelming force, but brute strength had failed against the cunning, predatory efficiency of the Draknari. A soft chime interrupted the silence. The chamber's artificial intelligence announced the arrival of an unexpected delegation. Representatives of the Terran Republic seek an audience. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the council. The humans? A minor species, barely a footnote in the galactic order. They had no empire, no vast fleets, no great war history. And yet, they dared to seek a place in this war? "Let them enter," Grand Admiral Vornik growled. The massive doors hissed open, revealing a trio of humans in crisp, dark uniforms. At their head stood Captain Elias Carter, his sharp blue eyes surveying the chamber with calm confidence. Beside him, Commander Aria Velasquez, a woman with a presence as commanding as any Dominion officer, and Lieutenant Ral Duran, a tactical specialist whose quiet demeanor belied the sharp mind beneath. They stopped before the council. Carter clasped his hands behind his back and inclined his head, a respectful but measured gesture. "Honored counselors, the Terran Republic offers its fleet in service against the Draknari." A moment of silence, then laughter, deep, guttural, and filled with mockery. Counselor Vixal of the Ulthari, a feline species known for their pride, scoffed. "Your fleet? What fleet? The Terran Republic has no grand armadas, no dreadnoughts. Your species is barely a century into deep space travel. What could you possibly offer?" Carter remained unshaken. "A different way to fight." The council's mirth faded. The sheer audacity of the claim piqued their curiosity. Vornik narrowed his gaze. "Explain." Carter gestured, and a holographic projection flickered to life. It displayed a formation of human warships, small compared to the Dominion's behemoths, but sleek and efficient. "Your fleets are built on the doctrine of overwhelming force," he began. "Size, power, resilience. The Draknari have adapted to this, countering it with their own strength. But they do not expect an enemy that fights differently." The display shifted, showing a simulated battle. Human ships darted through the battlefield, weaving between enemy fire with terrifying agility. Instead of trading blows, they disrupted communications, jammed targeting systems, and launched precision strikes at critical vulnerabilities. Draknari warships, formidable as they were, faltered against this unpredictable assault. Aria Velasquez stepped forward. "Your ships are castles. Ours are daggers. You've been using hammers against an enemy that needs a scalpel." A tense silence filled the chamber. The simulation's outcome was undeniable. The human fleet achieved victory in a battle where Dominion forces had been routed time and again. Vornik leaned forward. "A clever trick, but simulations mean nothing in real combat. Prove it." Carter's lips curled into a slight smile. "That's why we propose a live test." The council deliberated. The idea was absurd, yet the war had driven them to desperation. Finally, Vornik nodded. "Very well. We will conduct a battle simulation against our own fleet. If you fail, your species will never speak in this chamber again." Carter's voice remained steady. Understood. The test was scheduled for the following cycle. The Dominion assembled a fleet of formidable warships to serve as the opposing force. The humans would command their own vessels in the simulation, facing impossible odds. The alien spectators gathered, expecting a swift and humiliating defeat. The battle commenced. From the outset, the Dominion forces moved as they always had, coordinated, powerful, but predictable. The human fleet, by contrast, shattered every expectation. Instead of forming a solid front, they split into independent units, executing rapid, unpredictable maneuvers. They exploited sensor blind spots, disrupted command relays, and delivered devastating strikes to unprotected systems. Within minutes, the Dominion fleet was in disarray. Captains barked orders, attempting to counter the human tactics, but every move they made was anticipated and countered. Their warships, superior in firepower and armor, became liabilities as their own bulk slowed them down. The battle ended in total Dominion defeat. Stunned silence followed. The counselors stared at the final outcome, unwilling to accept what they had witnessed. Vornik exhaled slowly, his talons tightening into fists. "This is not trickery?" "No," Carter replied. "It's the future of warfare." The Grand Admiral studied him for a long moment before speaking. "The Dominion does not place its trust lightly, but we are left with no choice. Your fleet will join our next campaign." Carter nodded. "We won't disappoint." As the humans departed the chamber, Arya Velasquez glanced at Carter. "They still don't fully believe in us." "They will," Carter said, "when they see what we can really do." The Veil Nebula loomed ahead, a swirling mass of cosmic dust and ionized gas stretching across the void like a celestial battlefield waiting to be claimed. The Dominion fleet had arrived first, its massive warships forming a formidable blockade. Great behemoths of steel and energy, they were the epitome of the Dominion's doctrine, unmovable, impenetrable, overwhelming. Yet, despite their size and firepower, a tense undercurrent ran through the ranks. The Draknari were coming. Aboard the Dominion flagship Vanguard Eternal, Grand Admiral Vornik stood with his hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on the tactical displays. Even he, with centuries of command experience, felt the weight of uncertainty. The humans had been granted a place in this battle, but they were a wild card, an unknown quantity in a war where certainty was a lifeline. His gaze flickered to the secondary screen displaying the Terran fleet, smaller, sleeker, moving with a kind of coordinated fluidity that seemed almost unnatural. Their lead vessel, the TSV Valiant, was a mere fraction of the Vanguard Eternal's size, yet the humans carried themselves as though they had nothing to fear. On board the Valiant, Captain Elias Carter studied his own tactical readouts. The Dominion's battle formation was predictable. A solid wall of ships, bristling with firepower but rigid, slow to react. He tapped his fingers against the control panel, calculating. If the Dominion held the front line, the humans could operate in their shadow, striking where the enemy least expected. But that depended on whether the Dominion would hold long enough. He activated his comms. "Commander Velasquez, status?" Arya Velasquez's voice came through crisp and steady. "Fleet in position. Duran has electronic warfare prepped and ready. We're standing by for contact." Before Carter could respond, an alert flared across the bridge. Incoming warp signatures. Dozens. Then hundreds. The Draknari had arrived. They did not emerge in formation like the Dominion. They erupted into real space like a swarm of nightmares, sleek organic hulls gleaming under distant starlight. Their ships were alive in ways no mechanical construct should be, adaptive, shifting, moving with eerie synchronicity. A low murmur ran through the Dominion ranks as their sensors struggled to keep up with the chaotic swarm. The sheer number of enemy vessels was staggering. The battle began without ceremony. Draknari assault craft hurtled toward the Dominion lines, firing in coordinated bursts of plasma and kinetic munitions. Dominion cannons roared in response, energy lances cutting through the void, obliterating anything caught in their paths. Massive dreadnoughts exchanged devastating broadsides, turning space into a maelstrom of fire and wreckage. The Dominion's defense was holding, but only just. For every Draknari ship destroyed, Another took its place. Carter watched, waiting. This was the critical moment, the point where the Dominion would expect brute force to carry them through. But brute force wasn't enough. He opened a direct channel to the Dominion fleet. "Admiral Vornik, your center line is collapsing. We need to move now." The reptilian officer bared his fangs. "The line will hold." Carter clenched his jaw. "No, it won't. Pull your capital ships back 500 clicks. Give us room to maneuver." There was a pause. Then, reluctantly, Vornik gave the order. The Dominion line shifted, their massive warships withdrawing in a move that, to the Draknari, must have looked like retreat. The enemy surged forward to exploit the perceived weakness. That was their mistake. In that moment, the human fleet struck. The Valiant and its sister ships accelerated with inhuman precision, weaving between enemy fire with an agility no Dominion vessel could match. They struck like predators, targeting command nodes, disrupting formations, cutting off supply lines. The Draknari, so used to slow, grinding engagements, struggled to adapt. Their vast numbers meant nothing when their coordination was systematically dismantled. Lieutenant Raul Duran worked tirelessly from his station, launching electronic warfare countermeasures that sent enemy targeting systems spiraling into chaos. "They're blind," he reported. "At least for the next 90 seconds. Carter didn't waste a second. "Velasquez, move in. Hit their flanks." The commander led a squadron of strike craft in a blistering assault, carving through the disoriented Draknari ranks. Explosions rippled through the enemy fleet as precision railgun fire found weak points in their organic hulls. One by one, the enemy ships faltered, burning, breaking apart. On the Dominion flagship, Vornik watched in disbelief. The humans weren't merely fighting, they were dismantling the enemy with a precision that defied conventional warfare. He had mocked them. Now he saw what they truly were. But the battle was not yet won. The Draknari, though wounded, were not broken. Their war doctrine, much like the humans, was built on adaptation. The enemy fleet adjusted, focusing fire on the more fragile human vessels. Carter's ships, despite their skill, were taking losses. The Dominion forces had to re-engage, but if they returned to standard tactics, they would only make the same mistakes. Vornik made his decision. He opened a fleet-wide channel. "All Dominion vessels, follow human command. Adjust formations as instructed." Carter barely had time to register his surprise before he seized the opportunity. He relayed orders with precision, guiding both human and Dominion forces in a unified attack. Together, they executed a final, devastating maneuver, an encirclement that no enemy, no matter how advanced, could withstand. The Draknari fleet crumbled. What remained of their forces fled into the void, defeated. The battle was over. As the debris of war drifted silently through the nebula, Carter sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. They had done it. The tiny human fleet had not only survived but had turned the tide of battle. A transmission came through from Vanguard Eternal. Vornik appeared on screen, his expression unreadable. "You fought well, Captain Carter." The words were measured, but there was a hint of something deeper, respect. Carter nodded. "So did you." A pause. Then Vornik gave a slow nod. "Perhaps the humans are not so small after all." The line closed. Carter turned to his crew. They had earned their place. But the war was far from over. The Draknari would return. And next time, they would not be so easily surprised. The wreckage of the Draknari fleet drifted through the Veil Nebula, silent fragments of once formidable warships now reduced to cosmic debris. The battle was over, but no one aboard the TSV Valiant allowed themselves to relax. Victory in one skirmish did not mean the war was won. If anything, it meant the real fight was just beginning. Captain Elias Carter stood at the center of his bridge, arms crossed as he studied the tactical readouts. The Dominion fleet was regrouping, their ships forming new defensive lines in the aftermath of battle. Repairs were already underway, damage reports filtering in from across the fleet. Human casualties had been lower than expected, but they had still lost ships, still lost people. Carter felt each name like a weight on his chest. Commander Aria Velasquez approached, her uniform marked with the grime and sweat of combat. "Preliminary damage assessments are in." We lost 3 destroyers, 2 frigates. Duran estimates repairs on the Valiant will take at least 48 hours, but we're still combat capable. She exhaled. The Dominion's losses were heavier. They weren't built for a fight like that. Carter nodded, his gaze shifting to the main display. The Vanguard Eternal loomed in the distance, its once imposing hull now scarred from the battle. He knew what came next. A priority transmission flickered to life. Grand Admiral Vornik's image appeared, his reptilian features betraying nothing. Captain Carter, you will report to the Dominion War Council immediately. The channel closed before Carter could respond. Velasquez gave him a sidelong glance. That sounded like an order, not an invitation. Carter sighed. It always does. Moments later, he stepped into the Dominion flagship's war room, a circular chamber dominated by a massive holographic display of the galactic battlefield. The tension in the room was thick. Dominion officers exchanged wary glances as Carter entered, their expressions caught between grudging respect and lingering doubt. Vornik stood at the center of it all, his massive frame casting a long shadow. When he spoke, his voice was controlled but firm. Your fleet fought well. Carter tilted his head. But the Grand Admiral's jaw tightened. But the Draknari will not fall for the same tactics twice. The battle at Vale Nebula was not their full strength. It was a test. They now understand what your kind is capable of. And they will adapt. He motioned to the display which zoomed out to reveal the broader war front. A new force is gathering in the Karen Expanse, larger than anything we've faced before. We estimate their invasion will reach our core worlds within 2 standard cycles. The scale of the enemy fleet was staggering. Carter knew the Dominion's defenses wouldn't hold. Even with the humans, they were outnumbered, outgunned. Vornik's gaze bore into him. We need a new strategy. Carter took a slow breath, considering. The Draknari were relentless. They never attacked without overwhelming force. But force alone was not the answer. He glanced at Velasquez, who had joined him for the meeting. She caught his look and nodded. We can't fight them head-on. Not this time. Vornik's tail flicked, a gesture of impatience. Then what do you suggest? Carter turned to the hologram, studying the enemy fleet's projected path. They expect us to fight conventionally. They've learned from our last battle. But there's something they haven't accounted for. He pointed to the systems along the Karen Expanse. This region is full of unstable subspace corridors. Dangerous, unpredictable. No fleet dares to travel through them. Vornik frowned. For good reason. Ships that enter those regions are never seen again. Carter smiled. Exactly. Which is why they'll never expect us to use them. A ripple of disbelief passed through the Dominion officers. Counselor Vixal, the Ulthari representative, bristled. You propose we lead our forces into certain doom? Velasquez stepped forward. We don't send the entire fleet. Just a strike force. A small, fast-moving group that can bypass their defenses and hit them where they're vulnerable. If we disrupt their command structure, break their supply chains, they won't be able to sustain their invasion. The room fell into uneasy silence. The plan was insane. It was reckless. It was also the only chance they had. Vornik studied Carter for a long moment before exhaling through his nostrils. A small force, led by you. Carter's expression didn't waver. Yes. The Grand Admiral turned to his officers. Prepare the fleet. The decision was made. The humans would lead the charge. Hours later, the TSV Valiant and a hand-picked strike group stood at the edge of the Karen Expanse. The subspace corridors ahead shimmered like fractured glass, the remnants of ancient stellar collisions twisting reality itself. No one knew what lay beyond. Carter stood on his bridge, feeling the weight of the moment. They were about to step into the unknown. No simulations, no guarantees, just faith in their skill, in their people. Velasquez stood beside him. If we pull this off, we make history. Carter allowed himself a small smile. If we pull this off, we survive. With a final command, the fleet surged forward into the maelstrom.